Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Kimish Orr, and today I'm going to be giving you a little bit of a deeper dive or a little bit more of a review on season ticket baseball. I did a first impressions, season ticket baseball first impressions, so a lot of this is going to be retreaded from that probably. But one thing that's different is I did my top nine must haves. I had done a top eight before, I refined it, and just recently did my top nine must haves in a tabletop baseball game. And so, what I thought I would do is go down the list of my must haves and see how season ticket baseball stacks up in the must haves. Now, these aren't your must haves, these were my must haves. So, some of these you may not agree with, some of these may not be as important to you, and that's fine. Now, I'm not going to give a statistical rank. I haven't really sat down to figure out to put these on a point scale. So, I'm not putting these on a point scale today or putting season ticket baseball on a point scale today. I may sometime in the future actually sit down and do that, figure out a point system, and rate the games that I've played in my life based on that system. But today I'm just going to go down the list of must haves and talk about where season ticket baseball ranks, how it stands up to the must haves, how it may fall short of the must haves, and that kind of thing. So that's what we're here for. My number one must have was statistical accuracy. And I have to say, I'm in the middle of a best of the 30s, best of the decades tournament, double elimination with the best teams for the 1930s. So keep in mind when I talk about season ticket baseball, it's going to be through that lens. And so the 1930s era may not be representative of the eras that you play or the modern era, that kind of thing. So it's going to be a little bit different maybe. But I've only played the 1930s with season ticket baseball. But in terms of statistical accuracy, I think season ticket baseball stands up and stacks up very, very well. I know a lot of people have done, showed their league replays and that kind of thing. So you can go to a lot of places and see how accurate it is. But the fact of the matter is, in the games that I've played, they everything's happening in and feels realistic and statistically accurate. The things that happen in baseball will happen in the game. Players who are great in real life or were great in real life are great in the game. Yes, there have been slumps and that kind of thing, but overall, the players that you would expect tend to find ways of getting on base. The pitchers who are big strikeout pitchers get a lot of strikeouts, and everything seems to be pretty statistically accurate. Again, I don't have a full season to go on. You can look elsewhere for that. But in terms of I'm partway into this tournament right now, so I've played, I don't know, 25, 30 games. And so far, it stacks up very, very well in statistical accuracy. Now, number two, which is very close, is all plays in the game. All plays in the game. And I'm happy to say that from what I've seen, anything that can happen in a real baseball game can happen in season ticket baseball. Now, there's one little caveat to that, and that is one thing that I was like, that hasn't happened. And I know it's happened in, let's say, Payoff Pitch when I've been playing Payoff Pitch, because I have a Payoff Pitch project going on right now too. And that is a drop third strike where the catcher throws out the runner at first. Okay. Drop third strike where the catcher throws out the runner at first. So it's a strikeout, but it's a 2-3 put out on the play. And season ticket baseball, rules as written, does not have those plays in it. Now, Clay did a nice blog post about why that is, and basically they were in the game at one time, but he changed them all to normal 2-3 catcher to first putouts. He changed them. And I think mostly, if I'm remembering the blog post, then I could be a little bit misremembering, but it was basically because, it's not the play. There are so many different ways that play can happen, that he just thought a 2-3 put out was kind of the best way to handle it, and not the strikeout 2-3 that sometimes happens, because tends not to be as interesting or whatever. Now, that being said, he did offer a homebrew suggestion that strikeouts that come off of the catcher's defense, you could just assume were the K 2-3 putouts, and that's what I've started doing. So it kind of resolves that. Again, he did a blog post, and I read it a while ago, so I'm not probably going to be remembering all of the details on it. But it was a decision he made not to have those in the game, which is fine, because there is that workaround if you're interested. But there's a pretty robust rare play system, and which I'll actually talk about later. But so anything that can happen in a game can happen in season ticket baseball, and I've seen it happen. I've actually had triple play. I have had a triple play, which is something I haven't had in any other game. That just transpired out of base running, base running mistakes. In any event, I think it's pretty good in that regard. Now, number 3 is lefty-righty splits, and there are lefty-righty splits for pitchers and hitters. Not on every play, if that makes sense, because only on some columns. Basically, the way season ticket baseball works, in its basic form, is you roll a 6-sided die and 2 10-sided die. So you're getting percentage rolls between 1 whatever and 6 whatever. And 6 is our stadium card. 5s are defense checks always. 3 to 4 is on the batter's card, and 1 to 2 on the pitcher's card. And on the pitcher's card, 100s are not dependent on lefty-righty splits. 200s are. And the batter's card, 300 results are not subject to lefty-righty splits, but 400s are. So you do get some lefty-righty split variance in there without it being on every play. So that's what I would say about that. But it seems it works pretty well. I've seen batters have results get switched because they're facing a lefty pitcher, lefty on lefty matchup or whatever, and they strike out instead of walking, for example, or whatever the case may be. So I think it's pretty good. Base running. So I originally had base running down as number 4, and that included steals and runner advancement. I'm going to split them apart here so that we have actually 10 things. And the first one I'll talk about is steals. Now, there is a stealing system, and I appreciate that there's an auto manager system so that you can automatically determine whether a runner is going to try to steal or not, because if a human's always making that decision, then you're never going to have the poor stealing guys try to go for it because their odds are just so bad. Likewise, you're never going to have those guys that only got 2 stolen bases, 1 caught or whatever, that hardly ever tried to steal. You're never going to have them even risk it. So the fact that there's an auto system alleviates that and throws in some chances of steals happening in certain circumstances. So I really like that. Now, in the 1930s league, stolen bases are really low. Now, I think, pretty sure it's because the teams in question didn't have a lot of stolen bases. And so, it's only come up in the 25 games I've played. It's only come up a couple of times where I've even had anybody attempt to steal. Just a handful of times. So, but again, I'm not willing to say that that's not accurate because the 1930s overall, the stolen bases are pretty low. And the teams that I'm playing, stolen bases are pretty low. Most players, if they have any stolen bases, just a handful, a couple of stolen bases. So it'll be interesting to see when I play different eras if that changes. My guess is it will. But some guys are just, because in the auto system, the first thing you do is compare the speed rating to the catcher's arm, and if it's not at least equal to the catcher's arm, they're not going to attempt it. Unless you roll a 20-sided die and it's below their steal rating. So again, it just hasn't happened very much. But I'm not willing to say it's not accurate because I've seen articles that Clay has written on his blog that go into the detail, because I think this very question was asked about stolen base totals being low, and he's kind of given the breakdown in the stats. So I believe the stats, and I think it's just a quirk of the first 25 games that I've played and the era that I'm playing in. Runner advancement. I think this is where season ticket baseball really, really shines. Because runner advancement, unlike pretty much any other game I've played where except maybe Stratomatic. Runner advancement in a lot of games, is more complicated, I'll say, in some ways, and not complicated enough in others, maybe. Um, but I think season ticket baseball gets it pretty good. You don't have to refer to a chart. All of the results are pretty much on the cards. So if you see a certain result, it automatically tells you that it's a single and the runner from second is going to score. The runner on first is just going to hold up at second. It tells you that with a result. Likewise, if you see the double plus, 2B plus or whatever, that means it's a bases clearing double. Likewise, there are results that give the lead runner, a chance of taking the extra base. It's up to him. And then there are some results that make the lead runner try to take the extra base, which I like that because, again, going back to the stolen bases, there are some cases with certain base runners you would never try to take an extra base with them. But in real life, they probably got caught trying to take an extra base at some point. So the way the system is set up, there are going to be cases where your player has to try to take the extra base. And there are overthrow possibilities and error possibilities on the throw. And if you play with the optional rules with the trail runners can advance or get thrown out and that kind of thing too. So it not only speaks to all plays in the game, but it speaks to the base runner advancement system, which I believe is pretty good, pretty accurate. Now, you're on the flip side, I know some people are like, well, with 2 outs, there should be bonuses to the running ratings. And so why is that not factored into the game? Well, the game does factor in the 2 outs with the bloop singles, bloop doubles. On a bloop single, runners are not taking the extra base with less than 2 out because they think it may be caught. But with 2 outs, they do take the extra base. And so they do take 2 bases on a bloop single, for example. So the game does include that stuff. It's just not factored into a decision that you're going to make based on base runners' running ability and that kind of thing. It's actually on the cards themselves. So it's baked into that system. But again, I could see where some people might not like that and may want to come up with some other system. But the fact is, it's all baked into the game. And I actually like it because then you don't have to make those decisions. The card tells you, or the result tells you what to do. And I like that. So the next thing I had on my list was the fielding system. And I would say, if anything, season ticket baseball more heavily weights fielders than other games tend to do. Because as I said, any roll with a 5 on the 6-sided die, you're gonna be looking at defense ratings. You're gonna be looking at that player's defense to determine the result. And so if you have poor defenders, they're gonna hurt. They're gonna hurt when their results come up. Now, the only quibble that I might have, and I bet you that if Clay could probably put the statistics behind this to show where I'm wrong, but the only quibble that I have is that every fielder has an equal chance of being tested. So the first die is going to be a 5, and whatever the number is for the second die tells you which fielder you're testing. 1 is pitcher, 2 is catcher, 3 is first base, and so on. So 1 through 9. And so every fielder has an equal chance of getting tested, whereas generally speaking, shortstops and second basemen, middle infielders have more defense chances than corner fielders, for example. They're just going to get more. And I want to say I've read something about how this is factored in to make things, to kind of account for that, but I don't know off the top of my head. And so it's just something that you'll notice, and something that, again, it's a very minor quibble, but people may have issues with that. The fact that every defender has an equal chance of getting tested on those defense checks, and the fact that they happen 1 out of every 6 times you roll the dice on average. So it's very heavily factored in. Likewise, stadium effects, which is the next thing. I love the stadium effects in season ticket baseball. Keep in mind that 1 out of every 6 times the stadium is going to be called into play. So it's just something to keep in mind. But the stadium charts really delineate, um, not only affect what happens on those results, because you check the stadium chart in those cases, but also in when you get a deep fly, which are home run possibilities, deep left field, deep center field, deep right field, based on the stadium, you have a lot more home runs in there or a lot fewer home runs, for example, based on where the ball is hit, you know. So I like that. I love the fact that it takes that into account. In addition, home field advantage is taken into account through the stadium system. So the home team gets a little bit of a bump on the stadium rolls that make it more likely they're going to get a base hit or a walk or get on base, and not grounded to double plays. And I like that because then it accounts for the home field advantage that exists. But yeah, I really love the stadium effects. Again, if 1 out of 6 times for you is a lot, maybe you're not going to like that. But I like it. I like that the stadium comes into play. I use the alternate weather system, so that also factors in. There's a weather system, which is really cool, and can affect things as well. That's dependent on the stadium and where the games take place. And I like that as well. So again, very, very detailed in the fact that weather comes into play. Rare play system. Season ticket baseball does have a very robust rare play system. It's not, it's not as dependent on, well, there are some results that are dependent on base runner situation. So, if there's no runners on base, you look at one chart. If there are if there's a runner on first, sometimes you look at another chart, that kind of thing. But it's pretty robust and gets into those plays that don't happen frequently enough to show up on the play results on a pitcher or batter card. So I like it, and it seems to encompass all of the weird, quirky things that could happen at a baseball game, ejections, injuries, and that kind of thing. Now, that flows into my next. Oh, by the way, and they also Clay just put out an alternate rare play system. Normally, rare plays only happen on when you roll a 5, which would normally be a defense check, and a 0. So a 5, and then the next die is a 0. So they only happen 10 out of every 600 times, 1 out of every 60 times. And the alternate rare play system replaces some of the results with other results, so you don't have to refer back to the chart, if that makes sense. It's more condensed, and takes out the long pages and pages of rare play charts that you may have to consult. For people that don't want to have to go to the rare play charts and flip through all of those to determine the rare play result. And they still encompass most of the rare plays that happen. So I just thought I'd make that note. Now, injuries in the injury system. Injuries only happen through the rare play system. They don't happen based on a die roll on a batter's card or pitcher's card. And they don't happen in between games or whatever, as a pregame event or whatever they may be. They only happen on the rare play system, or through the rare play system. Now, the injury system itself is pretty extensive. It tells you what kind of injury the player has, and that injury then determines how many games they miss. It's all on these charts that are based on their real world usage that year. So a player that only played half the team's games has a much higher likelihood of missing time than a player who was in every game the team played that year, for example. So I like the detail of the system, and I like it takes all that into account. I'm not sure if you're looking for, I know if you're a replay person, you probably ignore injuries altogether anyway. But for me, which I do more of I like to factor in injuries because I think it adds an element of figuring out how deep a team's bench is, for example, when they can't just play their top starters every game. I don't know that injuries happen quite as frequently as I'd like. But that being said, they are factored in there. I've had injuries happen in these 25 games I've played, so they do happen. I don't know if they're as frequent as real life would be, but then I don't know, maybe players don't want that many injuries because in real life there are a lot of injuries. So I don't know if anybody wants that kind of level of realism in their game. So I think it's okay. I think it's okay. And this is farther down on my list. This is number 9 on my list. And then lastly, out distribution. It does a great job of out distribution. As I said, I think Clay has done a good job of analyzing statistics and figuring out where outs are made and to what fielders and that kind of thing. And he's included that in the game in the results. So I know there was a question about why are there so many opposite field hits when aren't players pulling the ball more? And he did a whole analysis of that and found that actually, no, that's not necessarily the case. There are quite a few opposite field hits, more than you would expect. So he kind of did some analysis on that. So I think at the end of the day, Clay's done a good job of using statistics to really drive the decisions he's made and the out distribution. And I think that factors into everything else I've said already in the list. He's very data driven and uses actual data to inform his decisions. And he's made tweaks on the cards to better represent real life statistics and to make adjustments to that. For example, I know the home field advantage, excuse me, the home field advantage used to only be +5, and he adjusted it +10 because he found it +10 actually led to more accurate results. So, he's always looking for ways to make things more accurate, to streamline things, but also make them more accurate and more realistic, and to make the stats work out the way they should. And so even some there's some era adjustments in there for stealing home and some other things where there were just huge differences in eras that need to be accounted for in the results. So I think out distribution is just another case of where he's done a good job of getting that pretty good and pretty accurate, more so maybe than any other game I've seen, because going back to Stratomatic, Stratomatic, I don't know. If you're rolling the pitcher's card, you're getting certain outs regardless of the handedness of the batter. Now that's to a certain extent can still happen in Season Ticket, but I think he's done a good job of doing that. So the only thing I don't have on the checklist of must-haves is the fun factor, and then maybe things that aren't included on my must-haves. So on the must-haves, I think Season Ticket Baseball actually stacks up extremely well and extremely high. It's definitely one of my favorite baseball games that I've ever played. It goes right up there with Payoff Pitch. Probably Payoff Pitch and Season Ticket are my two favorite games, and for different reasons. And so in that regard, it stacks up extremely high on my list of must-haves. In terms of fun factor, I've been having a blast because it just feels like real baseball when you're playing. The results are realistic. It feels like there's just enough decision making involved. Players perform realistically. Pitcher fatigue, which isn't even on here on my list, pitcher fatigue is done in a pretty realistic way, so that in the 30s, for example, I have a lot of pitchers pitching complete games when real life sensibilities would have probably had me pull them earlier. But I'm pretty much trying to stick to the way the auto manager suggests and not pulling players that I normally would pull. So pitchers are getting a lot more complete games. And that's because their stamina ratings are high enough that, as he says, you shouldn't be pulling a player as soon as they reach their stamina limit. There is fatigue built in, and I like that it's gradual fatigue that builds up the more hits, walks, or hit by pitches the pitcher gives up after their fatigue inning, if that makes sense. Now, again, very, very minor is they don't suffer anything until they hit their fatigue inning number. So unless they give up 5 runs prior to that. So you can have a pitcher that is giving up a lot of base runners, but if he has a 7, he's still going to pitch through the 7th inning and not be fatigued ever. So in that regards, maybe there could be some more tweaks to that, but overall, I like the system because it is leading to more complete games, which is what I would expect in the 1930s. So I really love that. The only other very, very minor thing is it's not a 50-50 game. Okay, it's not a pure 50-50 game like Stratomatic, where 1, 2, 3 is always on one card, 4, 5, 6 always on the other card. That being said, it is a modified 50-50, we'll say, because ones and twos are always going to be on the pitcher, threes and fours are always going to be on the batter. Um, and so because of that, some people might not like that. We'll just say that some people might not like that, and might that might be a not a deal breaker, but that might bother people. Um, that it's like that, because you will still have results if you always roll ones and twos, for example, and they're always on the pitcher's card. Then your hitter results are going to be skewed, because let's say Tony Gwynn is still going to strike out on certain results on the pitcher's card, and so certain results on the pitcher's card are not going to factor the batter in, and certain results on the batter's card are not going to factor the pitcher in. But again, it's not a straight 50-50, because there are some redirects even that happen where certain pitching results you go to the batter's card for, and that kind of thing. So so certain pitching results will still send you the batter's card. So it's not a straight 50-50, and it does mitigate a lot of the issues that I have with 50-50 games. A lot of those are mitigated because of the system that's set up. So I do like that. But for those of you who want something that doesn't include that at all, you're probably going to be a little bit of it's going to be a little bit of a strike against it. But again, I think it's very, very minor, and a lot of it's because of the redirects and that kind of thing. A lot of it's mitigated, so it doesn't really bother me. It's still, as I said, that and Payoff Pitch are probably my two favorite games right now, and so it's not bothered me that much. All right, so that's my overview. Season Ticket Baseball. They have every season from like 1919 to current available. The cards are nice. They're nice and they're more square than they are rectangular. I've only played with PDF, so I don't know what the card quality is like. I'm not going to comment on that. But you can also get PDF seasons of any of those seasons that you want. And there is a way to also purchase, not PDF, but you can purchase individual teams if you want to purchase individual teams. You can do that as well through the website. If you haven't checked it out, highly recommend you check it out. It's a great game, a lot of fun, a ton of fun, and I just highly recommend it. So hopefully that gives you a good background of how it stacks up with my must-haves. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll probably do this with some other games as well in the future, and I'll maybe come up with an actual point system. Though the points are pretty much arbitrary, right? But I might try to weight the points and come up with that kind of system to rate games a little bit better. In any event, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, have a great evening.